From what's widely considered to be the first king of England, Athelstan, the grandson of Alfred the Great, 1086 years to today's Charles III, but of all those monarchs, who would be the most powerful to rule England? To determine the most powerful monarch of England, you would need to consider several key factors. Power can be defined in different ways. Of the main things to take into consideration, political, one's legal authority. This involves the ability of personal control over the government, parliament, and the legal system. A powerful monarch could create new laws, raise taxes, and punish rivals without significant opposition. Military strength and conquest. This is the measure of the monarch's ability to command large, successful armies, win battles, and expand the kingdom's territory through force, or also including a dominant navy. Wealth and land ownership. This looks at the monarch's personal and national wealth. A truly powerful monarch would control vast amounts of land and be able to raise significant revenue to fund wars, build infrastructure, and maintain a powerful court, the building of a navy and castles. Global influence. For later monarchs, this is a crucial factor. It is the measure of the extent of their empire and their influence over nations through diplomacy, trade, and colonial rule. With an average length of reign being 22 years, and 59 years being the longest reign for a king, with George III taking that title, and the shortest being the disputed Queen Lady Jane Grey with just 9 days. Which king had the greatest military muscle? Of the top contenders, William the Conqueror always comes to mind. He didn't just inherit a throne, he took it by force, and the last time England would be invaded. Total land ownership. After the conquest, William seized the land from nobles that had fought against him, then redistributing this land to his Norman followers in exchange for military service and loyalty. This act established a new feudal system, giving the king direct control over the country's most valuable assets, and created a personal, unwavering military force at his command. Then commissioning the famous Domesday Book in 1086, the comprehensive survey of England's land and resources, allowing him to understand the wealth of the kingdom, identifying potential dissidents and effectively taxing his subjects, brutally suppressing widespread rebellions, then tying followers to him with a redistribution of land. This was a key strategy to secure his power and loyalty. He granted vast estates to about 180 of his most trusted Norman barons and bishops. In return, these tenants-in-chief swore an oath of fealty and were required to provide military service and other resources to the king when needed. While William the Conqueror's wealth was immense, he would likely be eclipsed by Henry VIII. In direct comparison, Henry's seizure of the monastery's wealth gave him personal control over a greater total value of assets, which at the time amounted to roughly a quarter of England's cultivated land. Absolute political power. Henry's most significant act was the English Reformation, by breaking with Rome and declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England. Following that act of supremacy in 1534, centralizing power in his own hands, this move was unprecedented as it removed the last remaining check on royal authority, making Henry answerable to no one. He could now appoint bishops, dictate religious doctrine, and bypass papal authority at ease. With the seizure of church assets and land in England, this not only provided the crown with a massive immediate financial windfall, but also enabled him to fund his wars and a lavish court without having to rely on Parliament for approval, further strengthening his personal authority. What about Henry's military successes? While his goals were ambitious, driven by a desire to emulate his hero Henry V and reclaim lost French territory, he did manage to field some of the largest armies of the time, managing to muster 38,000 men for the invasion of France in 1544. While he did win some notable successes, such as the Battle of Spurs, the most important battle won was the Battle of Flodden against the Scots. Though he never fought in it and was away in France at the time, his campaigns were often expensive and strategically indecisive, and was often outmanoeuvred by more powerful forces on the continent. His most significant and lasting military contribution was his transformation of the navy, inheriting just a handful of ships from his father, but by the end of his reign he had built a formidable fleet of 50 ships. Henry invested heavily in shipbuilding technology. His ships were purpose-built to carry heavy cannons, introducing the broadside as a new form of naval warfare. Overall, his military record would be a mix of expensive campaigns, limited victories rather than the great battlefield general such as William the Conqueror or his hero Henry V. Another contender for England's most powerful monarch would be Henry II. His military and territorial power was not matched by any previous king, aggressively expanding a collection of territories that dwarfed the Kingdom of England itself. His military campaigns allowed him to consolidate territory known as the Angevin Empire. The Angevin Empire was a powerful collection of states in western France. ruled by the Plantagenet kings of England during the 12th and 13th centuries. It's named after the House of Anjou, from which its first ruler, Henry II, came, being essentially a large family holding a personal union of territories controlled by the same monarch. It was not a single unified land with a central administration like the Holy Roman Empire. Instead, the king ruled different regions under different titles: King of England, Duke of Normandy, Duke of Aquitaine, at its peak under Henry II, stretching from the Scottish borders in the north to the Pyrenees in the south of France, including the Kingdom of England, Normandy and Aquitaine, the counties of Anjou and Maine, and significant influence over Wales, Scotland and Ireland. The territories were lost under King John, who was militarily outmatched and outmanoeuvred by the French king Philip II. Henry II's true power lay in his legal and administrative genius. He's credited with laying the foundations of English common law. He introduced the use of jury in criminal cases and established travelling judges. They brought justice to all parts of the kingdom, centralizing legal power, weakening the authority of local feudal lords, and establishing that the king's law was the supreme law of the land. The legal control also served a financial purpose. Fines and fees from royal courts provided a stable income for the crown. His rise to power was a masterclass in diplomacy and strategic marriages. His marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in the Middle Ages. The single most important act of his reign was to marry Eleanor, whose lands were more vast than the King of France, brought the entire Duchy of Aquitaine into Henry's domain, transforming him from a king to the ruler of the massive Anjou Empire. A monarch overlooked with incredible power is Edward I, often called Longshanks and the Hammer of the Scots, the king depicted in Braveheart, who was a highly successful military commander whose reign was defined by relentless and often brutal military campaigns. His military career can be seen through three distinct phases: early experience in the Crusades, his methodical conquest of Wales, and his long struggle with Scotland. As a young man, and with the strong encouragement of his father, he participated in the Ninth Crusade. While the crusade itself did not result in major Christian victories, it provided Edward with valuable military experience, and established his reputation as a formidable knight and general. His most complete military success was his conquest of Wales. Edward's strategy was methodical and overwhelming. He used a massive army and a scorched earth policy. After a successful conquest, embarking on a monumental castle building programme, he constructed a ring of castles, including Conway, Harlech and Carnarvon, serving as military bases or centres of English power. Then in 1284, the Statute of Rhuddlan formally annexed Wales to England, with Edward's son later being named the first Prince of Wales. And our final candidate, and with a short rule for 9 years, Henry V as one of England's most powerful monarchs is built on his singular military genius and his ability to achieve the highest level of success against England's rival, France. His most famous achievement was the victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, leading a vastly outnumbered English army to defeat a much larger French forces. Henry's military success translated into massive territorial and political gains. His relentless campaigns led to the conquest of Normandy and culminated in the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, a stunning diplomatic achievement, disinheriting the French Dauphin and naming Henry as the heir to the French throne. This made him the only English monarch to have a legitimate claim to rule both England and France, with also having an ability to unite a kingdom that had been fractured by political strife by focusing the energy of the English nobility on a common external enemy. He ended decades of internal conflict and commanded a high level of loyalty and national pride, briefly making England the dominant force in Western Europe. I've chosen to not include later monarchs such as Queen Victoria and George V, though presiding over the British Empire at its territorial peak, covering over 13.7 million square miles and over 26% of the Earth's total land area, and ruling over 450 million people. With a combined military personnel of 5.1 million in 1945, this was also the largest ever military Britain had fielded, both in total numbers and as a percentage of the population. I've chosen to not include later monarchs due to a few key factors, including mainly the English Civil War. This is the most dramatic challenge to royal authority, ending with the king's defeat and public execution. This unprecedented act demonstrated that the monarch's power was not absolute and could be challenged and overturned by the will of the people and Parliament. Then later, in 1689, the Bill of Rights was passed. This document permanently limited the monarch's power. It stripped the monarch of many of their personal powers. The king or queen could no longer suspend or create laws without the consent of Parliament, and could no longer raise or maintain a standing army in peacetime without parliamentary approval, and established a principle of parliamentary supremacy, making Parliament the supreme legal authority in the country, and the monarch's role became largely ceremonial. Of all the monarchs covered, I would have to say that Henry VIII was the most powerful, and by quite a large margin, due to his calculated accumulation of authority. By seizing the immense wealth of the monasteries following his break from Rome, he became financially independent from Parliament. This vast fortune enabled him to quickly grow a large navy, field enormous armies for the time, and consolidate unprecedented power, making himself the absolute head of both church and state.